Good. Suzanne, how you doing this morning? Hope you're doing well.
I'm good, thank you. Nice to see you all.
Good. Nice to see you, and nice to see the three of you. Y'all are. I'm an hour early. It's still 8:30 my time, and I'm in some sort of Diet Coke induced coma, but I'm coming around sooner or later. Let's see. Introduce yourselves to us. We'll do it in this order first. Introduce yourselves to us and tell us what interests you.
Hello, good morning, and my name is Kate Smith. I'm a junior at Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut.
I'm Talia Perkins, and I'm also a junior at Staples.
I'm Eli Herman, and I'm a senior at Staples. And this is our teacher, Suzanne Cameraman.
She certainly is, and she's a good one too. It's good to see her, and she brought some fun teams to this dance a lot of times, and it's good to see her. Dr. Rogers, you want to say good morning to him?
Good morning, you know me. I'm Donald Rogers. I teach history at Central Connecticut State University, and I may have seen you in a state competition. I know I always enjoy working with Staples and teacher Cameraman, so look forward to a good conversation this morning. I teach history at Central. I've been involved in We the People for a very long time. It's a great program.
He told Dr. Stewart and me before we started that he would moderate any panel except the two from Connecticut. He was going to stay away from that so he could be absolutely fair, but he would be anyway. He's bragged on you real good before now, so we've been looking forward to hearing you. Dr. Joe?
Yeah, my name is Joe Stewart. I teach in the political science department at Clemson University in South Carolina, and I've been involved in the We the People program for a long time. Judge at the Nationals each year. It's one of the highlights of my year. I get to have conversations with people like you, relax, we're going to have fun, and we're going to learn from you.
And I'm Mike Miles. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and one of the things we've learned over the years is to keep our Crimson Tide women's basketball team from having to come to UConn and play your women's basketball team. We'll work real hard not to do that if we could help it. But it's fun to watch them. I guarantee you what a great year they had. All right, let's see. We're doing question one today, and you know it by heart. But for the, I think Emily, they're recording all of these sessions. I think, and what they've kind of taught us is that for the virtue of the recording, so people can watch it later and know what you were telling us about, we read the question as quickly as we can each time, and then we'll roll. This is question one. And it's a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes. I do not think the United States would come to an end if we lost our power to declare an act of Congress void. I do think the Union would be imperiled if we could not make that declaration as to the laws of the several states, unquote. What impact has judicial review had on federalism? Is judicial review, here's a word for you, a counter-majoritarian practice, and please support. And what limits, if any, would you place on the practice of judicial review? You can do that in 4 minutes. We'll tip our hat. You ready to go? Take over.
Judicial review was established in Marbury v. Madison, finding provisions of the Judiciary Act of 1789 unconstitutional. Justice Marshall declared that this judicial check on federal laws is the province and duty of the Judicial Department. The Supreme Court expanded on this in Martin v. Hunter's-Lessee, asserting its authority to review state court decisions dealing with federal law. The court rejected dual judicial sovereignty and instead initiated the primacy of federal courts over federal law. Judicial review can either promote centralization or state autonomy, depending on whether it strikes down or upholds federal or state legislation.
For the 14th Amendment, the court established its role in federal-state relations, building on judicial review to expand the federal government's power. In 1819, the court in McCulloch v. Maryland asserted that Maryland legislation taxing the national bank was unconstitutional under Article 6, Clause 2. Chief Justice John Marshall argued that the federal government is supreme within its sphere of action and laws made in pursuance of the Constitution.
It wasn't until Gitlow v. New York, which initiated the incorporation doctrine, that the court began the case-by-case protection of other guarantees in the Bill of Rights under the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. By incorporating most of the Bill of Rights, the court effectively forced states to protect the same rights as federal courts, transforming federal-state relations.
An judicial shift resulted in support of federal power under Article 1, Section 8, beginning during the New Deal. Rickard v. Filburn ruled that the Agricultural Adjustment Act did not violate the Commerce Clause, and activities don't need to directly affect interstate commerce to fall within commerce power. By permitting the regulation of both interstate and intrastate commerce by Congress, the court initiated a half-century of validating federal law under Commerce Clause power, consequently limiting state authority. It was not until the 1990s that the Supreme Court constrained Congress's commerce power in U.S. v. Lopez, holding that the Guns-Free School Zones Act was unconstitutional since the possession of a gun in school zones has no substantial effect on interstate commerce. The ruling respected state control of local issues, representing a deviation from the tendency to strengthen federal power.
Critics of judicial review argue that the Supreme Court, composed of 9 unelected judges with life terms, poses a counter-majoritarian difficulty, as justices declare laws unconstitutional without direct consent of the people. They equate majoritarianism to democracy, but considering the Constitution and its founding, these are not equivalent. The founders doubted majority rule, outlining presidential elections through the Electoral College, senatorial elections through state legislatures, and presidential appointment of federal judges. More importantly, because judges are unelected and removed from public opinion, they can protect what Justice Stone coined discrete and insular minorities in footnote 4 of U.S. v. Caroline Products. According to legal scholar Erwin Chemerinsky, immigrants, criminal defendants, and racial minorities are disfavored groups without political clout who must rely on the judiciary for their rights to be protected. While counter-majoritarian, the Supreme Court decisions serve an essential role in preserving these rights.
James Madison argued in Federalist 10 that measures are too often decided, not according to the rules of justice, by the superior force of an overbearing majority. When state interests obstruct the liberty of minority groups, judicial review is imperative. It should not be eliminated at its core, but rather altered.
Non-renewable 18-year term limits with appointment of justices every 2 years would give all presidents equal influence on federal courts. The 18-year term, according to Chemerinsky, is long enough to allow a justice to master the job, but not so long as to risk a court that reflects political choices from decades earlier. Non-renewable terms safeguard against judges making decisions for the purpose of reappointment.
Where public morality fails, it is vital that the independent judiciary can act for good. The court's integrity lies in their removal from public obligations, and marginalized groups not protected by the political process rely on this integrity for their protection. However valuable, the Supreme Court is flawed. Term limits are necessary to improve and maintain the judiciary, the treasured guardian of our Constitution. Thank you. We are now ready for questioning.
Well, thank you. I'd love to have a copy of that and sit and read that because you covered so many things so quickly and brought it in on time, but I'd love to have a copy of that. That was wonderful. Dr. Rogers, you speak Connecticut better than Joe and I do. You want to take them on first?
Sure. So you talked about Federalist number 10 and the warning against the tyranny of the majority. I'm wondering if there was concern among the founders and the Supreme Court during the 19th and 20th century about the tyranny of the states, too much state power. Is that why Justice Holmes was concerned that the Supreme Court must have the power to strike down state laws?
I think that the founders were concerned about too much power of the states. Specifically, the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, felt that if the states had too much power under Hobbesian philosophy, then they would become unruly, and the country wouldn't function, as happened during the Articles of Confederation and then Shays' Rebellion. So I think that that was definitely a significant fear, predominantly among the Federalist Party, but by the founders in general.
Was this concern the origin of Article 6, Section 2, the Supremacy Clause? The concern with excessive state power, was that why the founders put Article 6, Section 2 into the Constitution?
I think that the founders put the Supremacy Clause into the Constitution, yes, I think for that purpose. And it went along with the necessary and proper clause that their enumerated powers could be executed and that they were in function. I think they wanted to protect that.
You've talked about both the 14th Amendment and the Commerce Clause as means by which federalism has been affected. which of those has been more important in affecting how the national government and the states interact?
I think probably the 14th Amendment, because of the incorporation doctrine, it was able to apply the majority of the Bill of Rights, besides the 9th and 10th Amendments, and then certain provisions of some others. But I think that the 14th Amendment, because of that incorporation doctrine, that has been huge in that federal-state relationship.
I disagree. I think the Commerce Clause has been vital for minority groups. For example, in the US v. Heart of Atlanta Motel, the Supreme Court used the Commerce Clause to defend minorities in public places. So, the Commerce Clause has been a method for the Supreme Court to expand their interpretation of the Constitution and protect those groups.
I have to agree with Talia. I think the 14th Amendment's due process clause is very vital in terms of protecting the rights of minority groups. For example, in Obergefell v. Hodges, the court might have used judicial activism, drawing on the substantive due process right to marry. But I think the 14th Amendment's due process clause in this case was vital to protect the rights of those gay rights specifically.
How important should precedent be? If the court decides a case about First Amendment rights in 1990, and then social media abilities take off where we have more opportunities to communicate with each other, sometimes in unregulated ways and sometimes not. Should the court keep up with the times, or if they have made a decision on something, should that just be it for a considerable length of time?
I think that it's important to adhere to stare decisis in certain instances, but there are instances where society changes. For example, Plessy v. Ferguson ruled that separate but equal facilities were constitutional, and then with the civil rights movement and all of those social things happening in the civic engagement of that of African Americans to fight for their rights. Brown v. Board of Education, they didn't follow the precedent of Plessy v. Ferguson, and they used the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause to say that separate but equal was not constitutional and that these facilities were different. So I think that it should reflect current changes in society in that way and not always adhere to precedent.
I agree with Talia, but I don't think that's always what happens. As Kate mentioned, in Obergefell v. Hodges, the court upheld under the due process clause of the 14th Amendment that gay couples have the right to marriage. Except I believe that, with a quote by Justice Scalia, he says that, today the rulers of our country are made up of 9 judges on the Supreme Court. And he was kind of saying how, regardless of the societal issues that were, brought up in that case, the Supreme Court is expanding its power. And when the 14th Amendment was made, they were not considering, the right to marriage, especially not between same-sex couples. So although, our country should be, the Supreme Court should consider modern times, I don't think it's justifiable to, use these amendments that were created in completely different circumstances to justify why, things that are different now should be legal.
Go ahead, Kate. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. In Brown versus Board of Education, I think that's a standout case. It just goes to show that, the court is unafraid to knock down precedent. And I think that's important. Just like the claim that we've been supporting, the Supreme Court is essential in protecting minority rights. I mean, the state legislatures in southern states were never going to get rid of segregation. They had Black voters completely disenfranchised, and the only people in state legislatures in the South were white Southerners. So that just goes to show that Brown versus Board of Education was essential in protecting these rights. And in order to do so, they had to knock down precedent, and that's essential.
But to sharpen Mr. Miles's point, did Brown versus Board follow the times, the sentiments of the times, or was it in advance of the times?
I think it was in advance of the times. I mean, Brown v. Board didn't change racial segregation overnight. You still had grandfather clauses, and you still had Black voter disenfranchisement. I mean, it didn't change the world, but it was integral in creating the conversation, and that's where it really stood out.
Yeah, and I think the major change that we saw after Brown was future civil rights acts and voting rights acts.
Taya, go ahead and finish your sentence. You're doing good. If there's anything you want to add to that, go ahead.
I was going to say, so yes, the major change happened afterwards, but the Supreme Court decision was kind of a reflection of what was to come. Yes.
That's pretty good. And it's a good one to quit on too. Not bad at all. That was outstanding. I'm trying to have a fundraiser to raise money to buy that sign from Emily. I want to just buy it and keep it here where she can't make us stop. What a great conversation this was. All right, Connecticut doctor, what do you think about them?
So I really enjoyed your presentation. It was very well rounded. Your oral remarks, your responses were very thoughtful. You mentioned parts of the Constitution. You mentioned important cases. That was very, very good. In response to my question, you started pretty well. My question was, I mean, was there skepticism about the founding fathers toward the state power from the beginning? And you said, well, yes, well, Hamilton was very skeptical. And you had a big opening that you could have gone even further. And then the key person is James Madison. I mean, James Madison was very, having served in the Congress under the Articles of Federation, served in the House of Burgesses of Virginia. He was very skeptical about state power. And one of the notable provisions that he proposed in the Virginia plan was a federal congressional veto of state legislation. Now, that did not become part of the Constitution, but the convention was very mindful of that. And that became the origin of Article 6, Section 2, the Supremacy Clause. So the founding fathers were very concerned, with the states getting out of control. And I think that was an opening you could have exploited a little bit more. I like your points about the Commerce Clause, particularly in the 20th century, that they become a springboard from which the Supreme Court can protect minorities. I would have liked to heard a little bit more about the Supreme Court's use of the Commerce Clause earlier, back in the early 19th century. Consider Gibbons versus Ogden, or Ogden versus Gibbon. I forget what the title is, but that case, is all about the supremacy of Congress in the application of the Commerce Clause. So a little bit sort of a better view of the longer history on that clause, that would have been helpful too. So, but overall, very good, very responsive on our questions, and I thank you a lot.
That's high praise from him. Dr. Joe.
Yeah, I agree. I like if you've been doing this as long as I have, you have seen some teams that rattle off names of court cases, and sometimes they don't know what cases are all about. You clearly did. I thought you used the cases appropriately. I really liked, as you can tell from my follow-up question, bringing in the Commerce Clause in conjunction with selective incorporation, because it presents an interesting possibility. If you mentioned the Wickard versus Phil, if a farmer growing grain on his own land to feed to his own livestock is engaged in interstate commerce, what isn't interstate commerce? But then you followed up with that, but then the court kind of peels back on that later. In first use of footnote 4 of the Caroline Products case out of this, it wouldn't be a discussion of this issue without it, but yours is the first I've heard today on that. Two minor quibbles. You mentioned Heart of Atlanta Motel in discussion of the Commerce Clause. It's totally appropriate. But when you have a judge from Birmingham, I would suggest you also cite Katzenbach versus
McClung,
which was the companion case that had to do with a barbecue joint now closed in Birmingham. And my friends tell me I used to have a T-shirt that I wore on days I taught that course to that said I pigged out at Ollie's. I wore the shirt out, and my attorney friend there said, "Well, I can get you another shirt, but the next time you're in Birmingham, I can take you to a better barbecue joint." The other thing, a couple times you referred to gay marriage. It is a quibble that I have with my students when I'm trying to point out the importance of language. I insist that my students use same-sex marriage, not gay marriage. None of the state laws would have prohibited a gay man and a gay female from getting married. It's the same sex that was the problem. These are really minor points. I thought you did a very good job and very much enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, Joe and I like to talk about how long we've been around and what we've seen. He says that I enjoyed